welcome to the debate. I am here to advocate for a radical, perhaps unsettling interpretation of our source material today.
And I am here to dissent, bringing hopefully some much-needed ethical grounding to this discussion.
Right, so let's set the stage. Picture this. A blindingly yellow human skeleton, totally stripped of flesh. It is standing upright in these freezing, sterile blue aisles of a massive data center.
The visual whiplash of it is, frankly, astounding.
It really is. And above its bare skull, rendered in this chaotic, rainbow-hued elementary school font, you know, the kind of word art that screams of 1990s internet nostalgia, is a confession. It reads, quote, "Ever since I was a child, I wanted to have my data collected and stored by a third party."
I mean, it is a genuinely haunting image. You have the stark organic architecture of human remains just slammed against the infinite glowing geometry of the servers. It's enough to induce a kind of philosophical vertigo.
Precisely. And that vertigo brings us to the central intellectual crisis we have to navigate today. We are not treating this as, a mere internet artifact or some transient meme. We are treating it as a defining philosophical masterwork of the 21st century.
The question being, of course, how we interpret the skeleton's fate.
Exactly. Does this image represent the glorious post-human culmination of our desire for absolute transcendence through digital assimilation? Or is it a horrifying autopsy of human sovereignty, representing the total colonization of the soul by surveillance capitalism?
Right.
So my position is that this image is a radical manifesto. I champion it as a portrait of post-privacy liberation and joyous self-dissolution.
And I must approach it as a tragic warning. For me, this skeleton represents the final capitulation of individual autonomy to the machinations of a digital leviathan. It's the absolute surrender of our metaphysical interiority.
Well, let us lay our foundational cards on the table, then. To truly understand the skeleton is to recognize it as a profound articulation of amor fati.
Nietzsche's concept of embracing one's destiny?
Yes, a loving, unreserved embrace of one's fate. By voluntarily desiring the extraction of its data, the subject transcends its fleshy biological prison.
A prison symbolized by the fact that the skeleton is stripped bare, I assume.
Exactly. The meat, with all its irrationality, its illness, its inevitable decay, has been discarded. What remains is pure structure awaiting digitization.
But at what cost? I mean, you call it transcendence, I call it eradication.
Bear with me. If we draw on the philosophers Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari, they talk about this concept of the rhizome, a root system that spreads out horizontally in all directions without a central core.
Right, a decentralized multiplicity.
Exactly. Giving oneself over to this ubiquitous third party is actually a beautiful rhizomatic flattening of the self. By scattering our data, our preferences, our histories, our biometrics across countless servers, we cease to be a single, bounded, fragile individual.
Meaning we cease to exist as a coherent self.
We become a networked web, everywhere at once. We are finally freeing humanity from the archaic bourgeois burden of having a private ego. The desire to be dispersed into the servers is essentially the desire to become infinite.
Well, I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. And let me tell you why. To frame this absolute subjugation as liberation is an intellectual sleight of hand that completely ignores the ethical catastrophe at the core of the image.
Oh, come on. An ethical catastrophe?
Yes! Let me offer a grim Kantian analysis of this skeleton. Immanuel Kant argued that human beings must always be treated as ends in themselves, never merely as a means to an end. Because we have autonomy, we have inherent dignity.
And you believe the skeleton has sacrificed that dignity?
Entirely. What we are witnessing here is the literal depiction of homo saucer. That is a concept from philosopher Giorgio Agamben. It translates roughly to bare life. Stripped of all political agency. Exactly. It refers to a person stripped of all rights, all inwardness, reduced to mere biological, or in this case, post-biological existence. The skeleton is not liberated, it is entirely hollowed out. So you see it purely as a victim of commodification? It is the ultimate ethical tragedy. to willingly offer one's metaphysical essence, which, let's be honest, our data is the modern equivalent of our soul, to be endlessly reproduced by a corporate entity. It is a complete subjugation to what Martin Heidegger called Gestell, or inframing. Just for the sake of clarity, unpack Heidegger's Gestell in this context for a moment. Heidegger warned that modern technology forces us to look at the entire world, including ourselves, as just a stockpile of raw materials waiting to be optimized and used. A forest is no longer a forest. It is just a standing reserve of timber.
And the human becomes a standing reserve of data.
Yes. That is what this skeleton represents, a mere resource to be mined by the humming servers it stands before. It's horrific.
Look, I hear you on the Orwellian nightmare angle. I really do. But I actually look at the exact same physical reality, the ontology of the skeleton in the server room, and I see something entirely different.
You see a triumph, somehow?
Let's formally enter the first phase of our debate. Flesh versus information. You look at the juxtaposition of the organic skeleton within those glowing blue server racks, and you see the final triumph of the digital panopticon.
Absolutely. Because that is exactly what it is. The human has been boiled down to mere calcium and code. Think about the physical reality of a data center. The environment is entirely hostile to biology.
Well, they have to keep the machines cool.
Right. It is freezing cold. To prevent overheating, it is deafeningly loud with cooling fans, and it is devoid of natural light. The blue of those server racks is the cold, calculated hue of absolute algorithmic control. And look at the skeleton itself. The sartorial choice, if we can call it that, of the bright yellow hue is not accidental.
You read the yellow as pathological?
It is the color of jaundice, it is the color of decay, of sickness, of the total atrophy of the biological subject. The organism is dead, bleached, and yet trapped in a fluorescent purgatory. It reminds me of a medieval torture chamber, frankly, only sanitized with LED lights.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame the chromatic semiotics entirely differently. You see an Orwellian prison. I see something closer to a cathedral of enlightenment.
A cathedral?
Yes. Let us reconsider that specific shade of yellow. That is not the color of decay. It is alchemical gold.
Wait, alchemical gold?
Absolutely. The subject has undergone a profound transmutation. In medieval alchemy, the ultimate goal was the magnum opus, the great work of transforming base, impure matter into perfect, incorruptible gold.
So the flesh is the base matter in this analogy?
Yes. Through the voluntary surrender to data collection, the messy, irrational meat sack, the base matter, is burned away. What is left behind is the eternal, incorruptible data, symbolized by the golden skeleton.
Standing in those cold blue aisles as a saint in a reliquary.
You see it. It stands there not as a prisoner, but as a saint. The blue light isn't algorithmic control. It is the divine luminescence of infinite information.
A reliquary preserves the dead. It does not resurrect them. Your alchemical metaphor is incredibly seductive. I will give you that. But it fundamentally ignores the violence of the extraction.
Is it violent if it's voluntary?
The gold you see is fool's gold. It is the commodified sheen placed upon a corpse by a system that extracts value from its very lifelessness. You are romanticizing a slaughterhouse by calling it a temple.
But if we accept your premise that this skeleton is physically trapped and decaying in a purgatory of servers, then how do you explain the text?
The word art.
Right, which brings us to the second phase of our discourse, the epistemology of the claim itself. The chaotic, rainbow-colored word art declares, "Ever since I was a child, I wanted to have my data collected and stored by a third party."
A deeply unsettling sentence.
But the text is joyful. That implies a lifelong, innate desire, not a prison sentence. I want to focus intensely on that temporal anchor, ever since I was a child.
Ah, yes. The deeply insidious introduction of childhood innocence into this dystopian nightmare.
It is not a nightmare because this phrase proves the urge for data collection is a priori, meaning it exists independently of experience. It is not conditioned by society, it is innate.
Innate? A desire for data collection is innate?
The human subject has a primordial yearning for what John Baudrillard called the hyperreal, a condition where the simulation, the data profile, becomes more real and more perfect than actual reality. We want to be translated into data because data doesn't get sick, it doesn't forget, and it doesn't die.
So we fundamentally want to be digitized?
Yes, and the aesthetic choice of the chaotic rainbow font is absolutely vital here.
Oh, please tell me you're not going to defend the word art.
Defend it. I revere it. It perfectly mirrors the ecstatic, childlike innocence of this desire. It is the visual equivalent of a kindergartner's finger painting.
Right, a kindergarten aesthetic wrapped around mass surveillance.
It expresses a pure, uncorrupted longing to be permanently archived, to be witnessed by the infinite digital ether. It is innocent joy.
I cannot let that stand. That is a deeply chilling reading. To look at that rainbow word art and see innocent joy is to be completely blind to the mechanics of ideological conditioning.
Conditioning? You think the desire isn't real?
Let us draw on Hannah Arendt's work on totalitarianism or even George Orwell's 1984. This childhood dream is not a priori. It is retroactive memory falsification of the highest order.
Wait, let me make sure I'm following your argument here. You're saying the memory itself is implanted? That the skeleton never actually wanted this as a child?
It is worse than a simple lie. The system has so deeply colonized the skeleton's consciousness that it now genuinely believes its lifelong subjugation was its own original, authentic idea.
Like Winston Smith loving Big Brother?
Exactly. It is the exact psychological mechanism at the end of 1984, when Winston Smith looks at the telescreen and realizes, with tears in his eyes, that he loves Big Brother. He wasn't faking it. The ideology broke his mind until the oppression felt like a warm embrace.
But the font.
The tragedy of that rainbow font is its insidious infantilization of the subject.
Infantilization? How so?
By wrapping the cold rhetoric of absolute surveillance in the aesthetic of a kindergarten classroom, the system masks its violence. It forces the subject to articulate their own destruction in the language of a child's wish.
It's an aestheticization of trauma, you mean?
It is an epistemological plague. It rewrites history so that the victim actively hallucinates a lifelong desire for the butcher.
Well, I struggle with your reading there because it assumes the subject is entirely passive, a mere victim of a top-down ideological apparatus.
They are trapped in a server farm.
But the text explicitly states, I wanted to have my data collected. It centers the volition, the free will of the self. Even if we entertain your premise that the desire was initially engineered by a tech capitalist society, the active embrace of it, the conscious decision to say, yes, take me, neutralizes the oppression.
Engineered volition is not free will.
Doesn't consent change the ethical math here? If you will your own datafication, you are no longer a victim. You are an active participant in your own hyper-evolution.
A participant in one's own execution is still dead. You can enthusiastically consent to jumping off a cliff, but gravity will still shatter your bones.
A dramatic analogy, but fair.
Which brings us to the ultimate question, the third and final metaphysical core of this debate. Sovereignty versus the divine other. If this desire is absolute, if this grand sacrifice of the self is being made, to whom exactly is it being offered?
The elusive third party.
Yes, we must address the most terrifying phrase in the entire image. The third party.
The receiver of the sacrament. The keeper of the data.
Notice how the third party is left chillingly undefined. It is a faceless, unaccountable void. It is not a community. It is not a reciprocal relationship between peers. It is an abstraction that consumes.
Like a modern terms of service agreement.
Precisely. Think about the reality of modern terms of service agreements, the ones we all blindly click accept on. By consenting to be stored by this completely opaque entity, the skeleton commits the ultimate abdication of individual sovereignty.
But again, it chooses to do so.
Choosing to become a slave does not make slavery noble. In Kantian ethics, as we discussed, we must never treat ourselves merely as an instrument.
And you believe offering oneself as data is instrumentalizing the self.
Eagerly offering oneself to a third party for whatever inscrutable algorithmic purposes they have, be it targeted advertising, behavioral prediction, or mass surveillance, turns the skeleton into a pure tool. It violates every principle of the Enlightenment.
It is not transcendence to you, then.
It is a pathetic, cowardly surrender to an entity that doesn't even have the decency to show its face.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered reframing the third party completely outside the paradigm of a corporate oppressor?
How else can you possibly frame it?
You keep treating big tech or the third party like it's a villain in a dystopian novel. Instead, let us read it through a Foucauldian lens. Michel Foucault talked about the Panopticon, a prison where you behave because you might be watched at any moment.
Right. Constant internalized surveillance.
But what if we invert that? In a modern world devoid of objective meaning, devoid of traditional religion, the third party becomes the new divine. It is the ultimate objective observer we all desperately crave.
Wait, you are equating a server farm in a Nevada desert to God?
Precisely. Let's unpack that. For millennia, humanity desired an omniscient God to witness our sins, our virtues, our most private moments.
To judge us, yes.
Psychologically, we need to be known in order to feel like we exist. We terrified ourselves with the idea that God was watching, but we also found immense comfort in it. Today, the third party fulfills that exact theological function.
It monitors our search histories.
It sees our search histories, our biometrics, our geolocations, our midnight anxieties typed into search bars. It knows us better than we know ourselves.
Knowing someone's purchasing habits is not the same as knowing their soul.
But it is the modern equivalent. And by enthusiastically choosing to surrender to the third party, the skeleton exercises the ultimate Nietzschean will to power.
By submitting?
It looks into the void of the Panopticon and says, yes, observe me, archive me. By commanding its own datification, it achieves total mastery over its existential dread.
So the subject masters the system by yielding to it.
Exactly. The skeleton is not a means to an end for a corporation. It is the orchestrator of its own immortality. Long after the biological body rots, the data profile will be remembered, stored, and processed until the end of time.
The difference between the divine and the third party is grace.
Grace?
Yes, the divine conceptually knows you to redeem you. The third party knows you to exploit you. To confuse the two is the fatal error of our digital modernity.
An interesting theological distinction.
The algorithm does not love you. It monetizes your predictability. This skeleton has traded the eternal soul for server space, mistaking the mechanical hum of the cooling fans for a choir of angels.
Poetic, but dismissive.
It is a tragic victim, forever entombed in a cathedral of its own oppression, smiling with a jawbone that no longer possesses a voice.
And yet, it speaks. The text is loud, proud, and in vibrant rainbow hues. As we draw this discourse toward its conclusion, I maintain my position. This yellow skeleton is the ultimate postmodern hero.
A hero? Still?
Absolutely. It has shed the fragile dying meat of the human condition and achieved hyper-real immortality through voluntary data surrender. It represents a joyous, ecstatic liberation from the claustrophobic bounds of privacy, stepping boldly into the light of the eternal archive.
And I remain steadfast in my horror. This image is not a hero's journey. It is a tragic documentation of an epistemological plague that has convinced the human subject to eagerly build its own tomb.
A tomb of data.
A stark reminder of what happens when the inner sanctum of the self is eagerly traded away for the illusion of belonging to a network that views us only as an extractable resource.
Well, while our interpretations violently disagree on whether this image depicts our triumphant ascension or our civilizational collapse, I believe we have reached a profound point of convergence today.
We have.
We both absolutely agree that this image, this bizarre meme of a skeleton in a server room, is not merely an absurd internet joke. It is a prophetic document.
Unquestionably. The chaotic, mimetic aesthetic only masks the absolute gravity of the claim being made. It forces us to confront the very architecture of our modern desires. Have we been conditioned to want our own surveillance?
The tension between a joyous dissolution into the omniscient embrace of the third party and the desperate stoic defense of our sovereign inner sanctum
is perhaps the defining civilizational question of our time.
We must all eventually decide if we view the server room as our final prison or our ultimate paradise.
Or, perhaps, we must recognize that the walls of the server room have already been built around us.
Right. And the door is locked while we were busy admiring the rainbow fonts of our youth.
We leave you, the listener, suspended in this philosophical vertigo. We urge you to interrogate your own childhood desires, your relationship with the omnipresent gaze of the machine, and your inevitable destiny within the infinite, cold blue aisles of the server room. Are you the purified gold, or are you the decay? Until our next inquiry.